The humidity hung thick as a wool blanket, pressing against Private Thomas Reynolds' skin. Sweat cut tracks through the grime on his face. His gaze, cracked and bleeding, clutched the rifle like a lifeline. Somewhere in Les Green of New Guinea's jungle, enemy soldiers moved silently. One wrong breath could mean death. The war had long ago stripped away everything familiar. Months of fighting in this merciless landscape had transformed soldiers into ghosts, men who existed between survival and oblivion. Reynolds knew this terrain killed more men through disease, exhaustion and despair than actual combat. This is the story of a soldier lost and found, a narrative buried for 6 decades in a small leather-bound journal that would resurface decades after the war's end, revealing a haunting chronicle of survival in one of World War II's most brutal and forgotten battlegrounds. Reynolds was just 22 when he arrived in New Guinea in 1943. Young, drafted from a small farming town in Nebraska, he had never seen a jungle before. The U.S. Army was locked in a brutal campaign against the Japanese, fighting not just an enemy, but an environment that seemed determined to destroy both sides. The journal's first entries are crisp, almost clinical. A young man's attempt to make sense of a world that made no sense. July 12, 1943. Temperature must be 95 degrees. Humidity feels like breathing underwater. We marched 12 miles today. Lost 2 men to malaria already. Each page revealed the gradual transformation of a naive young soldier into a hardened survivor. The early entries spoke of home, of wheat fields and summer nights. By the middle of the journal, those memories had become distant, almost unreal. The jungle consumed everything. Hope, identity, the very concept of civilian life. Tactical maps, now yellowed and fragile, showed their patrol routes through terrain that looked less like a battlefield and more like a green hell. Dense forests where visibility stretched mere feet, where every rustling leaf could conceal an enemy soldier, where the line between life and death was as thin as a razor's edge. Reynolds' unit was part of the 32nd Infantry Division, nicknamed the Red Arrow Division. They were fighting a campaign that would become legendary for its brutality. The Japanese soldiers were entrenched, willing to fight to the last man. Surrender was not in their code. Every engagement was a fight to the death. By August, the journal entries became shorter, more desperate. Water running low, 3 of us sick with fever. Can't tell if the shaking is from fear or malaria. The pencil marks were sometimes barely legible, testament to hands trembling from exhaustion and illness. One particular entry dated September 3, 1943, stood out. A moment of unexpected humanity in the midst of inhuman conditions. Reynolds described encountering a wounded Japanese soldier, young like himself. Instead of killing him, he shared water. A small act of mercy that seemed to haunt him more than any act of violence. The division pushed through impossible terrain, mountains, swamps, razor-sharp kunai grass that could slice skin like paper. They fought the Japanese but also fought nature itself. Tropical ulcers ate through skin, creating wounds that never seemed to heal. Insects carried diseases more deadly than bullets. By October, Reynolds was separated from his unit. The journal entries became fragmented. A mix of survival notes and personal reflections. Lost compass broken. Been walking for days. Not sure which direction is safety anymore. Survival became a moment-by-moment negotiation. Ding water, avoiding detection, treating wounds, fighting constant fever. The jungle was a living entity, watching, waiting, indifferent to human struggle. Weeks passed, then months. Reynolds' journal entries became less frequent, the writing more erratic, sometimes just single words. Alive, hungry, waiting. How he survived remains a mystery. The journal ends abruptly, mid-sentence, as if something or someone interrupted the OWL entry. 60 years would pass before the journal was discovered, tucked into an old military surplus bag in an attic in rural Nebraska. Thomas Reynolds' family had long assumed he was killed in action, another name on a memorial wall, but the journal told a different story. A story of survival, of human endurance beyond comprehension. A testament to what men can endure when survival is the only option. The last page simply read, "If someone DS this, tell them we were here. We fought, we survived." The journal's discovery sparked a national interest that few could have predicted. Military historians, veterans organizations, and journalists all sought to piece together Reynolds' incredible story. His daughter Margaret Reynolds Thompson became the unexpected keeper of her father's legacy. Initial attempts to verify the journal's authenticity were met with skepticism. Military records from the Pacific Theater were notoriously incomplete, particularly those related to units that had suffered massive casualties. The 32nd Infantry Division had been decimated during the New Guinea campaign, with many soldiers simply listed as missing or presumed dead. Forensic document experts examined the journal meticulously. The paper, the ink, the handwriting, everything pointed to its authenticity. Watermarks matched the period, and the details were too precise to be fabricated. Each page told a story of survival that seemed to defy human limitation. What emerged was a narrative that went beyond typical war documentation. Reynolds hadn't just survived, he had transformed. The journal revealed a man who had been fundamentally changed by his experience, stripped down to the most basic human instincts of survival and compassion. Military archivists began cross-referencing his entries with other surviving documents. Fragments of his journey began to take shape. There were gaps, long stretches where his movements were impossible to track. Some pages were water-damaged, others torn or partially illegible, creating a puzzle that tantalized researchers. One particular section caught the attention of anthropologists and survival experts. Reynolds had documented interactions with local Papua New Guinean tribes, describing moments of unexpected alliance. These indigenous groups, often overlooked in official war narratives, had played a crucial role in the survival of many isolated soldiers. His descriptions were nuanced, showing a respect that was rare for soldiers of his time. He wrote about their survival techniques, their understanding of the jungle, their complex social structures. It was clear that Reynolds had learned more from these encounters than mere survival skills. The journal revealed a man who had become something more than a soldier, a bridge between cultures, a witness to a hidden war within the larger conflict. His observations about the local populations were so detailed that they became valuable anthropological resources decades later. Genetic testing would eventually provide more pieces to the puzzle. Blood samples from Reynolds' descendants were compared with genetic markers found in remote Papua New Guinea communities. The results suggested interactions far more complex than simple survival encounters. Margaret Reynolds Thompson dedicated years to understanding her father's story. What had begun as a personal quest became a mission to honor not just her father but the countless soldiers whose stories remained untold. She worked with veterans organizations, historical societies, and academic researchers. The journal began to circulate among academic circles. Military historians saw it as a crucial document of human endurance. Psychologists analyzed it as a study of extreme survival conditions. Anthropologists used it as a rare first-hand account of wartime cultural interactions. But beyond the academic interest, there was something more profound. Reynolds' journal spoke to a universal human experience, the capacity to survive, to dare humanity in the most inhumane conditions, to maintain hope when all seemed lost. Interviews with surviving veterans from the 32nd Infantry Division corroborated parts of his account. They spoke of Reynolds in hushed, almost reverential tones, a soldier who had become something of a legend, even among those who had survived the same brutal campaign. The journal raised as many questions as it answered. How had he survived? What happened during those months of apparent isolation? The gaps in his narrative became a canvas for speculation, for the imagination to fill in the missing pieces. Some veterans suggested he might have been assisted by local resistance groups. Others believed he had developed extraordinary survival skills. A few even whispered about more mysterious encounters, stories that seemed to blur the line between fact and legend. What became clear was that Thomas Reynolds represented something more than an individual soldier. He was a symbol of human resilience, of the extraordinary capacity to survive when all hope seems lost. The owl revelation came unexpectedly, decades after the war. A small wooden box discovered in Margaret's attic during a routine cleaning contained additional fragments of her father's documentation. Tucked between weathered maps and faded photographs were several hand-drawn sketches depicting complex tribal communication methods and survival techniques that modern anthropologists would later confirm were decades ahead of their contemporary understanding. These sketches revealed something extraordinary. Reynolds had not just survived by chance, but had been intentionally protected and guided by local tribes who recognized something unique in his character. The indigenous communities, who had their own complex understanding of warfare and human connection, had seen in Reynolds a different kind of soldier, one who respected their territory and understood the deeper rhythms of survival. Genetic studies conducted in the late 1990s provided further complexity. DNA markers traced through Reynolds' lineage showed unexpected connections with several Papua New Guinean tribal groups, suggesting relationships far more profound than mere wartime survival. These genetic links implied intermarriage, cultural exchange, and deep human connections that transcended the brutal context of war. Margaret's research culminated in a comprehensive understanding that went beyond her father's individual story. Thomas Reynolds represented a rare archetype, a soldier who had transformed from a traditional military instrument into a genuine cultural translator. His journal was not just a war document, but a nuanced anthropological text documenting human adaptation and mutual understanding. Universities began incorporating sections of his journal into courses on cross-cultural communication, military anthropology, and survival psychology. What had once been a personal family document became an academic resource, revealing layers of human complexity that traditional war narratives often overlooked. The most poignant aspect of Reynolds' story was not his survival, but his fundamental humanity. In the most challenging circumstances imaginable, he had maintained not just his physical existence, but his capacity for empathy, observation, and connection. His daughter Margaret would often reflect that her father's greatest achievement was not military ace, it was deeply, profoundly human. He had seen beyond the immediate conflict, recognizing the shared vulnerability and strength of different cultures forced together by violent circumstances. As years passed, Thomas Reynolds' story became something more than a personal history or a war memoir. It transformed into a testament to human potential, a reminder that even in the most dehumanizing contexts, individual humanity can emerge, adapt, and ultimately transcend. The journal, now carefully preserved, sat in a special archival collection, a silent witness to an extraordinary journey of survival, understanding, and unexpected connection. The chapters of Reynolds' legacy would unfold in unexpected ways. His granddaughter Elena, a cultural anthropologist, continued her family's tradition of bridging understanding between disparate worlds. She established a research foundation dedicated to documenting cross-cultural survival narratives, inspired directly by her grandfather's experiences. In 2035, during an international conference on conflict resolution, Elena presented her grandfather's original research alongside contemporary studies of human resilience. Her presentation revealed how individual acts of empathy could create profound systemic changes, even in the most challenging global contexts. The original journal, now fragile with age, became more than a historical artifact. It represented a bridge between generations, between cultures, between moments of profound human vulnerability and extraordinary human potential. Museums in Papua New Guinea and Australia collaborated to create a traveling exhibition that told not just Reynolds' story, but the broader narrative of human connection during conflict. What emerged was a complex tapestry of survival, not dead by military prowess, but by genuine human understanding. Reynolds' documentation showed how survival was never about individual triumph, but about recognizing our shared humanity. His daughter Margaret, in her years, would often say that her father's greatest lesson was deceptively simple. True strength lies not in conquest, but in listening, in understanding, in recognizing that every human story contains multiple perspectives, multiple truths. The wooden box that first revealed his hidden documents became itself a symbol. It sat quietly in the family archive, holding within its aged wooden frame a reminder of how extraordinary ordinary human compassion could be. As twilight settled on the research center where Elena worked, she would sometimes trace her gears over her grandfather's original sketches, feeling the thin paper that carried stories of survival, of unexpected friendship, of human resilience that defied the brutal logic of war. The journal remained a testament, a bridge, a silent promise that understanding could emerge from the most challenging human experiences.